Welcome to the Sunday afternoon show with me, Lucy Maskell. Every Sunday from 1 to 3 p.m., I love to interview a very special guest with an extraordinary story. So today I'm going to be interviewing Bonnie Woods, who is an ex-Scientologist and is now a Christian. She also does counseling through Exit, and she really helps people come out of high control cults. So welcome, Bonnie. How are you doing?
Oh, nice. Thank you for having me. It's nice for you to have me.
No problem. It's lovely to have you too, Bonnie.
Mhm.
Now, I just wanted to ask a quick question, which is really
Sure.
more about pop culture. I don't know if you've seen it. Have you heard in the news about the Scientology speedruns? Have you heard about that?
Yeah, I have. I've been watching them. My grandson brings them to me. He finds them highly amusing. The those runs, as he calls them. Yeah, I've seen them. Quite interesting. Of course, I demonstrated with Anonymous, and there were 700 outside the organization in London.
Wow.
I used to demonstrate with them. And they used to make a little sign, and they used to put it up in front of the demo on Tottenham Court Road. It said Bonnie Wood's Posse. We had great fun with them. I only met them because I was going into London one day, and Richard and I always make a point if we have time to pray in front of any Scientology organization. So we wandered on to the one that's in Victoria Street, the larger one, and there were these 700 kids, basically, with masks and they said they came up to me and they were passing. They had cake. They love cake, Anonymous. So they were passing out leaflets and information about Scientology, and they said, "Do you know anything about it?" I said, "Oh, a bit."
Just a
So
bit.
they, yeah. So they kind of recruited me, and my grandson. I got such street cred now, because my grandson was going to my closet and he found the mask because they gave me a mask. I said, "Look," they said, "Look, do you want a mask?" I said, "Well, not really. Doesn't really help because it's a little too late for that." But William was absolutely astonished that his Nana had a mask.
I love
So
that.
what I loved about Anonymous was they kept outside. They didn't interfere. I cannot condone anyone breaking the law,
Hmm.
and they are breaking the law by not by entering because it's an open door. It isn't now. I understand. I understand they're having to lock the doors now.
Which is sensible, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I just think I admire their desire to inform people. And I thought the one in California, the little people who were Christians, was quite good. Um, I think it's difficult because technically, biblically, we can't condone breaking the law. And if they wanted to go in and just insist on being given a free personality test, that would be fine. But they like to run all the way through.
They do.
And they're,
It's like a whole game of who can get the furthest, isn't it? And they
yeah,
draw maps of what it looks like inside. So would you
yeah,
say then you don't condone it, but from your experience with the Bonnie Woods posse, which is hilarious, with Anonymous,
yeah.
you would say like there's obviously better ways to do that,
Well, I
right?
think you have to do it, try to do it within the law. If they
Yeah,
wanted to go in and sit down in the reception area and say, "We understand if we come here, we can have a free personality test," that would be fine. But I think when you start moving in, not that I consider Scientology a counterfeit and bogus religion, and I have the right to say that because they had to make a statement in open court to protect my saying that. But I do think that you have to treat them with not with respect to them, but respect to the law.
that makes sense. Well, thank
Yeah,
you so much, Bonnie, for sharing your views on that. I
that's
think it's
okay.
quite rare to hear a ex-Scientologist view on something so niche within TikTok. But I
Well,
think I think you're right with that. Is you have to
yeah.
obey the law, and actually, if you want to go and visit, like I don't have an actual desire to go in, but if I did,
No, I
I'd
wouldn't.
book an
I
appointment
wouldn't.
and then have my
Yeah,
test and then go in the building.
yeah. Lots of people have done that. I think the thing I liked about Anonymous was that they strategically planned a worldwide demonstration on the same day, and they managed to get a major demonstration like they had in London in every major city on the same day. I mean, they were technically brilliant. There is an aspect, I don't totally understand it, but at one point when I was working with Anonymous, somehow I'd wandered into the what they called the dark web, whatever that is. So somehow I entered in there, and then it well, technically all hell broke loose, but some of the Anonymous came into where I was. I don't know how they found me. And they started berating those on the dark web, like, leave her alone. She shouldn't be here. We're here now. She's coming with us, sort of thing.
That's
So,
hilarious, Bonnie. Well, thank you for
yeah.
sharing that tangent about being on the dark web. I didn't expect you to say that, but that shows how much of a legend you are. Now, I wanted to go into my next question, and that is for people who have no idea what Scientology
Okay.
is about. Maybe like us, they haven't watched the Louis 3 documentary or Leah Remini, but could you give us a
Yeah.
really short one-to-one, a bit like the South Park episode? Could you just summarize what Scientologists believe in a nutshell?
Well, it's difficult because it's quite complex. Scientology is a pseudo religion that professes to be able to help you become, well, it alleges that it can help you become more aware of who you are as a spiritual being. I think the thing about Scientology that, we always need to come in the forefront of our mind is that I'm going to be very controversial, right? So I don't know how much you have to cut, but I'm allowed to say all this. So Scientology's founder, Hubbard, was a Satanist. So the philosophy and religion of Scientology have its roots in the occult, which people will never find out easily. I mean, hopefully, I used to pass a leaflet out that gave them that information quickly, but I think Scientology professes to be some sort of self awareness philosophy. But it's probably, I would consider it one of the most dangerous cults you could find.
I can
But I'm pretty.
imagine from your experience. And just to say, with what they believe, because I did watch that South Park episode about
Mhm. Yeah,
Scientology, and it
yeah,
was about,
yeah.
is it Emperor
It's
Xenu?
terribly funny. Hmm?
So sorry, I'll just repeat again.
Xenu. It was sorry, Xenu. Were you talking about Xenu?
That's the one. So,
Okay. Well, I can quote you from my leaflet, which is,
yeah, just if you
and
just go quickly through it, if that's okay, Bonnie.
yeah,
Thanks.
I'll try. With the secret upper levels, Scientologists seek to achieve supernatural powers. They have a belief in reincarnation because they believe that 75 million years ago there was a galactic ruler called Xenu who rounded up all the people from 76 planets and brought them to Earth and dumped them near volcanoes, which is a little bit difficult to believe. You actually have to go very high up in Scientology before you'd have that level. I mean, you'd have had to have spent a great deal of money.
Wow.
So, it's quite bizarre. They're upper levels, but then of course every cult has its secret levels. The danger of Scientology is that people can be recruited easily on the lower levels. And because those levels are hypnotic induction, they soon want to progress higher and higher, of course. And once you finish a level, then if anything goes wrong and you say, well, I'm not happy and I haven't accomplished anything, they say, oh, they'll come on the next level.
Wow. And just to say, there's something about going clear, isn't there, with like with all the
Yeah.
stuff in the volcano. What has that meant for humanity then?
Well, clears are professed to be people who have rid their mind of all their traumatic memories. But it's clear is a very low level in Scientology now. I mean, you have to go much higher to have any kind of power, supposedly. Yeah, allegedly.
Okay. Wow. And that's the general gist of it is to try and become that better person, self-awareness,
Well,
self-help.
not so much a
And
better person.
yeah.
A person who's clear, who has removed those traumatic memories from their mind. But as you reach the higher levels of Scientology, I think they have OT8 now. I'm not sure. When I did Scientology, I think there's 25 odd levels. I went up to OT3, which is about the volcanoes and everything.
Wow.
But now people can go higher,
They've created
supposedly.
new levels, basically.
Well,
Interesting.
they can't create too many because they can't create any actually because Scientology will only use on any level, in any way, at any time. They will only use the words of L. Ron Hubbard.
Okay. And talking about
So
L.
it
Ron
has,
Hubbard. So
yes,
sorry, Bonnie. Let me just, sorry, I
yeah,
don't
go ahead.
want to interrupt you. Sorry.
It's
So
all right.
L. Ron Hubbard, Bonnie,
Hmm.
it wasn't it
Yeah.
true that he was actually a science fiction writer, but he also lied about his past and what he was into, and then he exaggerated it, right?
Well, he didn't just exaggerate. I think we can safely say lied. Um, he often said, "I didn't have three wives. I didn't have a second wife." So, but Hubbard was not known for his veracity or ability to speak the truth. He actually knew, I think, given that he was a disciple of Aleister Crowley, who was an infamous Satanist. But Aleister Crowley had no charisma or personality, so he couldn't actually create a cult like Scientology because he couldn't, really interact well with people, understandably. So Hubbard knew that he could create a mind set, and he probably because of his belief in his own occult power. So he could create a mindset that would entrap people, and he knew it would.
Wow.
I think the best example of that is when C.S. Lewis talks about, the fact that the greatest danger of the Western society is we don't believe in the occult.
Yes. Or we go the extreme and see it in everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing that, Bonnie. I want to go back to your childhood in the States because
Okay.
people will be
Okay.
able to detect the American accent. So,
Oh
growing
yeah.
up, I know from reading your book that you had one parent that was Catholic and one parent that was
Yep.
Protestant. What was it like growing up in that household, and did you have any kind of faith?
I grew up in Ohio near a small town, and I had three older sisters. My mother was Protestant. I come from a long line of 200 years of American Protestants. But when she pioneers actually, but when she became married to my father, she had to convert to Catholicism because that was the way it was in 1950. So she had to sign an agreement that she would bring us up in the Catholic faith. So I went to convent schools from 5 years old through college. So I was exposed a lot to Catholicism. But my grandmother was the social secretary of the Congregational Church. And so when she would have us come and stay with us, she would play Billy Graham to us and she would talk to us and she would try and help us understand the difference between Catholicism and true Christianity.
And for you, did you actually have any kind of faith of praying, or was it more just a religious thing?
Oh yeah, because I was very good at spelling. I would. We have these things called spelling bees. Oh, you don't have them, but it's like a contest to see who's the best speller, and I was always very, very good. So I would win things. There were prizes.
Wow.
So the prizes that I won was a glow in the dark Mary. She glowed blue, and Jesus glowed green. Now you don't have those anymore because they were dangerous, actually. But so now they don't make radioactive statues. But anyway, I won the two statues, so I brought them home. Now, my mother was very good at when we came home from school, we'd be given holy cards, and we liked the ones with the martyrs, with the, being stabbed and everything. She would take them away. And if we had any that referred to Jesus, we could keep those. The Mary cards went to some place, who knows where that was. So she took the Mary statue and she said, "Oh, that's very interesting." And then she said, "You can keep the Jesus statue." I said, "Okay, fine." So I put it, we have closets. When I became a Christian, I thought when you said you were going in your prayer closet, I thought you meant to go in the closet.
Like literally.
So we have big closets in America. You walk in, it's like a room. So I put Jesus in my closet. So my sister would say to my mom would say, "Where is she?" And she'd say, "In the closet with Jesus." So I can remember as a very small child being very devoted to Jesus, really.
That's incredible. And the fact that you
Yeah.
had a spelling bee prize of a statue, that's very like, unique and American, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that. Well, I wanted to fast forward to, that aspect of your childhood to when you were older,
Yeah.
because I know you eventually married your first husband, David, and he
Yeah.
bought you this really nice, cool sports car, which is always
Yeah.
nice, isn't it?
BMW.
The BMW,
BMW.
yeah. But little did you
Yeah.
know that that relationship would end due to his volatile nature. So could you tell us what happened next when you met Larry, who was working on your car?
Yeah. Now this is something in my radio interviews. I like to always put it first. Um, One of the interesting things about writing Deceived was it's kind of a description of all my sins. So I'll be happy when everyone else has to write a book and talk about their sins. So obviously I didn't become a Christian till I was 41, so I have a colorful past, but thanks to the grace of Jesus and
Amen.
his mercy, um I'm forgiven. But yeah, my first husband, he bought me a sports car, but the problem with David was he had a Harley Davidson motorcycle, which was so polished he kept it in the lounge. And he was very fussy about that motorcycle. And I, accidentally did something that alarmed him. And I became aware of his volatile nature. I was 19 at the time. I think that Catholicism created an idea in my mind that if you wanted to be with anyone, you had to be married to them.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, because in the Catholic Church, it's they have very strong views about adultery, so obviously they would be keen. I had a roommate from Texas once. She said the problem is you marry all the people that you date, and I said, well, that is a problem. So,
You're
but
so
I
funny.
think David was quite violent, and I think he was very troubled, and of course at that young age you don't realize. But he bought me this sports car, which actually was another source of great temptation because it was a yellow TII fuel injected BMW, and I drove at 100 miles an hour from St. Louis to Kansas City and got picked up by the police. But fortunately, they felt sorry for me and let me go. But so fast sports cars and too many divorces is not a good recipe for happy life.
Wow. Well, I think I don't know you're a bit of a speed runner yourself with that
Yeah,
BMW. It
I
sounds quite a cool
am.
color
I
though. I love
am.
yellow.
It
That's
was a
great.
cool car. It had a Dolby stereo system. Your radio show would have sounded really good in there. So,
I bet we'll have to get her back. But I know that when you met that husband, the one after
yeah,
David, he actually
yeah,
introduced you to Scientology, didn't he? Tell
he
us more about
did.
that.
He did. Well, the sad thing was, I was at the time, I went to school in Missouri because I went to Fontbonne College, which is a girls' convent college. And then because I was a special needs teacher, I was invited to do some master level courses at St. Louis University in psychology. Now, you would have thought that that would have, kind of protected me. However, it didn't. But so Larry read the Dianetics book, wanted to go take a personality test. And all of that, all of those initial stages don't seem dangerous. What's really dangerous is the first communications course that you take is a series of training drills. They're communication drills, supposedly, but they're actually hypnotic induction.
Oh
So
no.
you become within a short period of time. I think I was talking to my friend Alexander Barnes Ross, who he'd be great to interview. He's not a Christian yet. Um, but Alex was telling me that the communications course now is only 35 pounds. Well, it was only about 25 pounds when I joined,
So they've
and that
increased
was
it.
only by 10 pounds. But I joined in 1970 something. Um, so people come in, they take a personality test, they're told how depressed and terrible their life is, and then they're encouraged to just pay a small amount of money to take a communications course, which effectively is hypnosis. So by the time they finish that course, it's much easier to get them to spend more to go on
That
further.
makes sense. And what kind of questions
Yeah.
did they ask you at the time when you did the communications course?
Well, it's called the Oxford Capacity Analysis, and it has nothing to do with Oxford at all. They just called it that because that's a great hook. So there's 200 questions on the test, and it asks you all kinds of personal information. It takes you a long time to answer those questions. Yeah, there's questions about the typical kind of personality test questions, do you worry about being late, and do you like to read train time schedules, and bizarre questions, but repeated questions. But when they make a graph of your results, it's always terrible. The graph should be up here, but it's all down below, and that's to make you feel, like, oh, well, I better do something about it.
It's
Yeah.
always rigged then. It's no matter what you do, you're always going to get the same results so that you
Ex-
can get the money, right?
yeah, you would get probably slightly different um, results, but not necessarily anything positive. It's rare. You would be rare to get any high results. Now,
Wow.
the reason they are capable in a good major city, because I did it myself. I could easily root in 20, 30 people a day. They would probably aim for like 200 people a week. So out
That's
of
a
that,
lot.
even if you get a small percentage, that would be a lot.
They would be a lot. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much, Bonnie, for sharing that first part of your
Okay.
story. It's so fascinating already. So much has happened. But we'll be
Yeah.
back right after this song. Welcome back to the Sunday afternoon show with me, Lucy Maskell. We're having a spectacular interview with Bonnie Woods. It's a very unique story of how she joined Scientology and how she left to follow Jesus. So, Bonnie, when you joined Scientology, what did your family think about the situation?
They were quite upset. My whole family was upset. Because my father knew about Hubbard from the 1950s. And of course, all families, and we've worked with probably over 1,000 families in our ministry of escape. And the common denominator is that families are better at finding out information about Scientology that would be frightening for them and trying to tell their family member. And for the most part, because they're on these induction drills that they're hypnotized and vulnerable, one of the first things they do is warn the member that their family is going to disagree with what they're told, and that those disagreements with their family mean that someone in their family wants to put up obstacles to their spiritual awareness, and they want to suppress them so that they won't continue in Scientology. So they warn them that that's going to happen. And because they're already quite vulnerable, and I think most families have family conflicts that, they would kind of say, oh, well, that makes sense because my mother doesn't understand me and my father treats me badly. And so that idea that their families might be suppressive to their spiritual gain, then they don't pay attention to what the family is trying to say.
That does make sense. And
Yeah.
also the fact that your father knew a lot about L. Ron Hubbard, so he was very much
Yes.
against it. And so
Yeah.
you joined the Sea Org, and we hear a lot about the Sea Org, but for those who don't know what is the Sea Org?
The C organization is, well, Hubbard decided at one point, Hubbard went and moved to East Grinstead to St. Hill Manor. And that's where he was living with the Scientology organization there. And he decided that he would go off on a ship. Mainly, I think he was trying to avoid some of the controversy surrounding the religion, supposed religion. So he went off on a ship called the Apollo, and he decided he would have his own navy. So he created a paramilitary organization and he was the Commodore, of course. So the rest of them, including myself, I was in for a year in California. You had to wear a uniform. You had to act like you were in the Navy.
And what was a typical day like for you? Because I heard it was very grueling.
Well, it was grueling. I was in Los Angeles, but I recently attended a very heart-rending meeting of Scientologists, former members. We had a meeting in East Grinstead at Trinity Church about their experiences, and I think they had a worse time in England at St. Hill than I did in California. But a typical day is you'd have to be there probably like 8:30 in the morning, and then you would work until 9 o'clock at night. But then that wasn't enough because you'd have to do, they had taken over a hospital in Los Angeles, making it into the big blue buildings. And you had to do construction work or you had to clean everything. So you would rarely go home before midnight.
And you weren't getting paid for this, is that right?
Well, I got there were times, it's all dependent on how much money the organization is making. But the lowest paid people, of course, are the staff. Probably the most I ever made in a week, and that we're talking a 90-hour week, probably $25.
That's insane. And you actually lived on the site, is that right? They give you accommodation.
Well, they give you accommodation. My accommodation was it's the Hollywood Inn, which has now been restored because I think Mr. Miscavige likes to have some of his offices there. So he's redone it nicely. But when I was living there, it was like a huge old Hollywood hotel, and the elevator didn't work, and we lived on a higher floor. And, the only vision you had was Hollywood Boulevard and the garbage chute. I mean, it was quite, and we lived on rice and beans for months at a time.
And then that was, you did that, but you didn't see anything wrong because you were serving the organization, right?
Oh, yeah, saving the planet.
Saving the planet. Wow. And later on in the story, right? I know your husband Larry, he saw that you were advancing quite high in the levels and he was quite
Yeah.
maybe a bit jealous and unhappy about that. So could you tell us what kind of higher levels of OT did you have to do to get so advanced? And please explain what OT is to people who don't know what that is.
Yeah. Well, the term OT refers to operating Satan. Hubbard designed that word Satan to represent you as a spiritual being. So these higher levels. So you start out very low on what they call the bridge to total freedom. That always gives me a smile because when we rescued 11 refugees from different foreign countries from St. Hill, I used to tell them to come to the sports center because there was a bridge there, and I called it the bridge to total freedom.
Ironic, love it.
Uh, but anyway, the bridge to total freedom starts at the bottom, and then you get up to the OT levels. You have to be clear, and then when you're clear of these supposed unconscious experiences that are holding you back, then you can go on to higher, superior levels where you have supernatural powers and things. So that goes from clear up to, I think it's OT8 now. I finished OT3.
How did you get there? Like, what did you have to do to advance?
Well, you have to pay a lot of money. Now, if you wanted Lucy, if someone you knew someone, I mean, hopefully, if you knew someone was wanting to start Scientology, we could intervene and prevent that happening. Now
Definitely.
that you know an exit counselor, but if you wanted to go in and you took the personality test and you had unlimited funds, you'd probably spend in the up easily 100 grand to get to clear, and then you have to pay some more to get up higher. In my instance, I was hired by a millionaire who I actually recruited off the street. He was a millionaire, and I happened to run into him on the street in Missouri, and I persuaded him to come into the organization. He hired me to be his nanny, and as a gift, he paid for all of that
And that's how
process.
you obviously advanced because that's how you got the money. Wow,
And
that's really
oh, it's a
expensive.
terrible thing. What a waste. But
What a
never.
waste. Yeah, bit of a
Yeah.
scam. So after this, you meet
He
Bob.
could take it off his taxes, though. You have to remember that the Church of Scientology is, unfortunately, despite all the efforts of hundreds of former members, still considered tax exempt in America. So the IRS gave them that status so people can take it off their income tax as a donation.
That is wild, isn't it? The fact that it's tax-free. Wow.
Well,
So I want to move on to the next part of your story, which
yeah.
is you met Bob, who I think I would say is the marketing director of Scientology at the time.
Well, he was
That's
he was involved with public relations, yeah. He was
yeah,
actually involved with something that was called the Guardian's Office. And they're supposed to protect Scientology from enemies. So their job is to, try and convince people that Scientology has good things that they do. But mostly they're there to try and stop people talking about it
got it.
badly.
So yeah,
Yeah.
he was really running the PR department. What an ominous
Yeah.
name as well with
Yeah.
that. And when
Terrible
you
job.
actually married him on your wedding day, what happened?
The church was raided by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was the largest raid ever. They broke into the headquarters in America and they raided it. I will say, I'm going to do a plug for this young man because I love him.
Go for
This
it.
book, this book is called Child X, and he was raised in Scientology. He won some prestigious literary awards. It's beautifully written. Such an amazing young man called Jamie Mustard, and his mother put him in the Sea Org when he was a baby.
Wow.
So, I mean, if you want to read about what actually occurs to people in the Sea Org, this is a really good book to
Thank
have.
you for that book
Yeah,
recommendation. It's always good to find out more, especially from someone
yeah,
who's grew up in it. Wow. So I'll
yeah.
check out Child X. Now, what did happen for you for doubts? Because when did the doubts and questions start for you?
Well, I don't think I actually doubted the technology. I became critically ill. I had stage 4 endometriosis. And because you don't receive any medical care while you're a Scientologist, and they don't pay your Social Security, so you don't really have any access to proper medical care. And I was very critically ill. And I had friends who were not Sea Org members. In Scientology, you can be in the Sea Org or you can be on staff in a local organization or you can just be a public person who just gives them money. So I had some friends who were just giving the organization money, and they knew me very well, and they knew how ill I was. So they wanted to help me to get hospitalized. So I left the organization. Um, and of course, when you try to leave the organization, they threaten you with expulsion. And the problem that you're going to have with that is if you have any family involved or you have any children or a husband, then that person has to disconnect. You can't have any further communication with them.
That's
So
crazy.
when I wanted to leave, of course, they have a person called the ethics officer who disciplines people trying to leave. And they try to make it as, horrendous to leave as possible because they don't want to lose people that work free, basically. Anyway, when this ethics officer met with me, he said, if you leave, we're going to expel you and you won't be able to speak to Bob, your husband, or your child. Because at that point, my eldest daughter was 3.
You couldn't speak to your child.
No, couldn't see her or speak to her. So they gave me this. They said, you better go think about it because we're going to issue an expulsion order and you're not going to be able to be here and no one will be able to speak to you. And it's on yellow paper and they put it up on a board so everybody knows. So I had this piece of paper in my hand. Now, this is way before mobile phones. There are no mobile phones. It's hard for the young to understand that we lived without them. Um, so I went out of the organization. I went to a phone box, and my husband of 44 years was a good friend of mine. And so I tried to realize I didn't even have any money to call him on the payphone if I wanted to. So I kind of just stood there. I was quite distraught. Now, my husband will tell you that he was driving on the Hollywood 101 freeway the wrong direction, and he felt he should turn around the car and go back. He had no idea where I was, and he drove up to that phone box, and there I was. And he said, whatever's the matter? And I showed him the paper. He said, right. So he went over to the organization. It's a huge building, and he walked into the reception and he said, I want to see the ethics officer. And she said, well, you have to have an appointment. He said, no, I don't think so. Where's his office? So she pointed, and he went around. And when they do a disciplinary interview, they lock the door. Well, Richard wasn't dissuaded by a locked door, so he just pushed it open. And he went in and crinkled up the expulsion order in his hand, threw it on the man's desk, and said, is this your rubbish? And the man said, what's he talking about? I said, he means trash. All that throughout this period, he's holding tightly to my hand, so I'm accompanying him wherever we're going. And he said, it's very simple. He said, either she's happy or not. He said, but she's not happy because you have told her she can't take care of her child. Now, if she's not happy, we have two options. You can bring your child, or he always apologizes for this because he's a pastor now. He said, or I'll have to break your legs. And they brought her to the organization and gave her to me immediately.
Wow, that threat worked then. That's
So
incredible.
we have a joke amongst the former members that I'm one of the fastest exits out of Scientology. Ordinarily, say that you're a member and you're just trying to do it right because you want to do it right. You have to go and see about 12 different people to try and get their permission. And then you're called what's out ethics. And you have to try and be treated pretty much like pariah. Sometimes people are locked up until so they can't leave.
That's so much like a spirit of control, isn't it? Why do you have to like get
Terrible,
permission, right? That's a cult.
terrible,
That's
terrible.
incredible. It's incredible
Yeah.
how Richard he rescued you and he was very forthright about it. But I can understand for him, he saw what you were
Yeah,
going through, especially after illness and everything. They still expected
yeah,
you to do all that work. Now,
yeah,
fast forward a few years, you actually moved to England. Because is it Richard originally from England?
yeah. Richard's from Worthing, born in Worthing. Yeah. So we moved here in 1985. And then we lived in Worthing for a while, but then the churches together, East Grinstead is the cult capital of Europe. It's the headquarters of, it's the London Temple of the Mormons. It's a headquarters for the Jehovah Witnesses. There are many Wicca covens. There are witches covens in Ashdown Forest, and then of course there's the headquarters of Scientology. So the churches together of Scientology um, was not a part of the churches together. So their opinion of Scientology was such that they needed someone to come and be there so they could get some help from us. Because we were the only existing Christian ministry with a phone number or a helpline or anything. So they said, would you come and live in East Grinstead? I said, no way. No, thanks. Not this one. Mm-mm. I said, yeah, it's really nice there. And you have nice old buildings, but you also have too many doctors.
It's totally understandable.
Yeah. But then they said, well, please, will you come? Because I was having to drive there all the time because when people would escape, we would take them out to the Christian bookshop, which was appropriately called the open door.
And it was there. Wow.
Yeah, and they would go in the bookshop, and the bookshop lady would call me and say, I've got one. And I'd come around to the back of the bookshop and take them out the back. So, yeah, we had an underground railway for 11 refugees from Ethiopia, Kenya, and European countries. People who wanted to leave, we managed to extricate them.
That's really incredible because even you've
Mm.
escaped from it, you know what it's like, but then to be called
Mm.
there, you're like, no, God, it's just too much. But actually, God worked through your experience. That's quite
Yeah.
a huge experience. So when you were doing that, were the Scientologists there trying to stop you, or was it
Oh,
underground?
they would always try and stop any kind of activity like that. We had three wonderful young men who I still have the privilege of talking to, who were from Harare. And Scientology was going to African countries, recruiting people, bringing them to St. Hill on the premise that they were joining a church. And obviously, in their culture, that seemed okay and a chance to go to the West. And when they got to St. Hill, they took their passports away, and so they couldn't leave. But one of them escaped and went to a homeless shelter, SIPO, and he was from Harare. So he met a man in the shelter who happened to have my phone number. So then we got SIPO out. So then SIPO said, well, I got two more friends I need to get out. So I said, fine. Well, called them up, and he spoke to them in the dialect of Harari, so no one could understand. And so then I said, bring them to the bridge to Total Freedom on Saturday, because they would get like an hour or
An
two
hour.
or three
Wow.
hours at the most. And so he brought them there. So I went with one of the local pastors. I had very brave pastors. And we picked them up, but they didn't have any belongings. So I said, where are your things? They said, oh, we were scared to bring them because they would notice that we were taking them.
So much fear.
So so we had to drive to where they were kept in a house with like 200 people, dreadful conditions, and pick up their goods and their things that belonged to them. And then we would put them in safe houses with Christian families and move them. And then I would go with them to London to the embassies and file a report and shut the door so that no more would come.
That's so brave, Bonnie, and I can imagine they're so thankful to this day that you did that because they would have been stuck
They're
in this cult.
lovely. They're lovely.
Wow.
They're nurses. I mean, there was one from Ethiopia. There were some from Kenya. Um, I remember one lovely couple. Um, the family that were taking care of them said, Bonnie, she won't tell us what's wrong. Can you come? And she was called Julie and Edward. Their mother was the director of education. And so I went to see her. I said, Julia, whatever's the matter? She says, I'm pregnant. And they're not allowed to have babies in Scientology. They're told they have to abort their
Why
babies
is that?
because it's not productive to have children. They don't produce enough. They don't do enough work.
That's awful.
People don't understand the dark side of Scientology. People say, "Oh, Tom Cruise." That's all people ever know about is Tom Cruise. Poor man. I remember when he was married to Katie Holmes, I had a great T-shirt. It said "Free Katie."
Did you?
Because I was really, because she's from Ohio, I just had this thing about Katie Holmes. So I had this Free Katie T-shirt. I was so excited when she got out. I was like, yes, she's
Yes.
free.
And did you jump up on the sofa because you were so excited? Sheila.
I could have. That would have been good. Um, I think that, we only associate it with celebrities, really. But I think there's been some fantastic work done by Leah Remini.
She's
And
amazing.
yeah, and Aftermath is an amazing series to watch. It's on Netflix now. I recommend everybody watch it. I mean, you can offer this leaflet to them because if my name is on it, it's protected, and it's a pretty good leaflet about
And
Scientology.
I can share the leaflet on our social media because I do have a digital
Yeah.
copy of it, Bonnie. It's very good. It's a
Okay.
summary of
Yeah.
Scientology and what they don't
Yeah. It
tell
was
you.
written by me. It was written by my expert counselor, John Aiken,
Ah.
who's my ex counselor.
Shout out to John
Yeah.
Atack. Just to say to
Yeah.
people, with one of my previous guests, Ray Aldridge, who was an ex-Jehovah's Witness, he took me to a cult, not actual cult, sorry, cult
Yeah.
conference where we met Stephen Hassan. Shout out to Stephen,
Oh yeah,
who's
I
an
know
incredible
Stephen
expert,
Gregory.
and
Yeah.
Bonnie knows him. And John
Yeah.
Atack was there. Wasn't he on the marketing team for Scientology once?
He
Something like
was.
that.
Well, book John's book on Scientology, A Piece of Blue Sky, is the text on Scientology.
It
I mean,
is, yeah.
he's got a new one that I like. Can I just quickly go get it so you
You
can see?
can go get it, yeah. There's so many great book recommendations to find out more about Scientology, as obviously we've got a limited time in this 2 hours to talk about what they believe and things, but
This is
there's lots of
this
book
is the new
recommendations.
book. Here's the new book. If Scientology ruled the world,
Wow.
Nazi occultists, sex magic, space aliens, and the Second Coming.
That is such a unique
It's
title, especially
terrible.
for a family-friendly show. So that's one by John Atack, and that's
Yeah, it's
Atack.
quite heavy, that one, but I love that one because he goes really more deeply into warning people about Hubbard and what he actually believed. But I mean, obviously, I call him two wise one. He calls me three. Father, Son, and Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Because when I come, they all come. He says.
That's hilarious. You're the encyclopedia Wikipedia Scientology. I love that. Now, I wanted just to go to this last part of your story, which I think was
Sure.
absolutely fascinating because actually it was all over the news, I think about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So
What?
you actually ended up meeting lots of people. You're giving out these leaflets
Yeah.
outside the Scientology shop in town. And what led you
All
to be
lots
sued
of
by the
towns.
church?
Yeah.
So, what led you to be sued by the Church of Scientology?
Well, I sued them actually. So they countersued me. I brought the first lawsuit for libel. Um, I had this I had this leaflet from reading John's books, and he allowed me to see a lot of documents about Scientology. We produced this little "What the Scientologists Don't Tell You" leaflet. So I decided I would go to Brighton and stand by the recruiters and pass them out. And the recruiters were not happy. But I said it's so they would say, "Do you want a free personality test?" And someone would say, "Well, I don't know." And I'd say, "Well, why don't you read this first?" So it started in Brighton, and then we moved to East Grinstead, and then the churches decided we would have a Christian vigil, and that we would stand outside. They had opened a bookshop in the main part of the town, and to protect the population of East Grinstead, we passed out these leaflets. So they took offense at that. And so one morning when my eldest daughter got up for, I think she was in high school at that point, she went out and they produced a leaflet called "Hate Campaigner Comes to Town" with a terrible picture that was taken by one of their private investigators, which I complained about because it wasn't very flattering. And it said Bonnie Woods. Well, I'll tell you what it said because I can tell you from the court order. That's always good. Hate campaigner comes to town. A group of Scientologists put the leaflet through the letterboxes of those living on the Woods Road and handed it out to members of the public on the high street. The leaflet described Mrs. Woods as a hate campaigner, someone motivated by hatred and religious intolerance, and a deprogrammer who tried to force people away from their chosen faith. It also cast doubt on the sincerity of her claims to be a born again Christian. And unfortunately, in the High Court of Justice, they had to say the allegations in the leaflet about Mrs. Woods were untrue and they had to apologize. Because I told my Queen's counsel that he said, "What do you want, Bonnie?" I said, "Well, they have to say sorry."
Wow, that
So
is such
they
a one
had
of
to
a
say
kind
sorry.
case, isn't it? I think it must be one of the
Yeah.
most unique cases in the
It's the
UK.
only
So,
public
wow,
apology that we know of to a former member.
it's the only apology. Wow, so you've made history, Bonnie. How does that feel? The fact that they had to apologize to you.
Well, took 7 years of our life because we didn't have this wonderful law firm, Allen and Overy, which is one of the largest law firms in England, took on our case. But that was 7 years later. We did 27 interlocutory hearings in the High Court as a litigant in person.
That's incredible. And didn't they have to pay you like £5,000 or something? And you'd
50,
actually been praying about it of like what was going to happen.
well, £55,000 they had to pay.
Wow,
Um,
55,000.
and 5,000 was the tithe. Well, it was my 50th birthday, and that's a jubilee year. So my barrister said, "What do you want?" I said, "Well," she said, "Well, we couldn't get as much awarded to us as normally you would because we didn't take any money for the work we did with Escape. So in order to get a liable payout that's substantial, it has to affect your income." Well,
Yeah,
we didn't have any income. So she said, "What do you want?" I said, "Well, what about 50,000? It's my 50th year." She said, "Okay." I said, "But can you make it 55? Because I need to tithe it somewhere."
that's incredible.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And also, when I was reading your book, Deceived, I think
Mhm.
you said that so the solicitors, the second ones, they actually did it for free. Is that right?
Yes, they worked pro bono. What happened was we were in the high court on our own as litigants in person, which is grueling, really. But the clerks in the court were good because they would call me up and tell me to do this, do that, So anyway, we had a friend who was involved with the Liberty Panel, which is an English group that defends people who have people's right to speak freely. So they said to them, "Can you take the case?" They said, "No, we're not touching that. That's Scientology. But we'll refer her to the Liberty Panel, which was the major London law firms." So we got Allen and Overy's, the second largest, picked it up. So then we had Queen's counsels and barristers, and so we had at one point, well, they sent a memo around asking people, "Do you want to help with this? Because it'll be good on your CV." So we had about at least four lawyers, four solicitors at one time. And
That's
then, of course,
amazing.
you have to have barristers, and then my young barrister was very brave, and so she had a lot of friends who were QCs, and they'd help her. So we had a huge legal team when we finished. Yeah.
That's amazing, Bonnie. Now, I've got two more questions because we've only got
Yeah.
10 minutes left. Could you tell
Okay.
us very quickly in a nutshell, because when you were doing this, you'd already become a Christian, what led
Yes.
you to become a Christian? And then, final question, what would you say to people who are thinking about joining the cult, and what would you say to them?
Let's take the last one first. If people were thinking about, or you know of someone, or you hear of someone who's thinking about joining Scientology, just tell them, just Google it. Just put the word in. Um, even if it's not a negative connotation, something will come up. I mean, they're welcome to put my name in, and then it will come up. Everything will come up, and they obviously will see that this is from a particular person. But I think the internet is great to prevent. I think the thing is to not attack, to not say, "Oh, that's pretty stupid that you want to join that," and give them all the information that you have, which would be way above any information they'd be able to take in. But and just be willing to speak to them and continue to be careful about treating them kindly and not attacking their belief because they may have already been involved in those training drills. So you have to be a bit careful. I became a Christian in 1991. Um, I became a Christian because a very brave young pastor came in to talk to my husband in the building office. My husband's a carpenter and a builder. And I had a friend who was talking to me for years about Jesus, really. And she did our books, and her husband came in. He he was with a group that was called, wait a minute, Demas Shakarian. It was the Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship. And so she would invite me to dinners. Would have like a dinner with a speaker. And she invited me to a dinner. And well, she did this for years because I did cooking classes with her. And she said, "Do you want to go to a dinner?" I said, "Okay." And then Richard was a little wary because he said, "I think she's religious." I said, "Oh, I don't think she's religious." I said, "It's only a dinner." So I went to the dinner, and there were people there at the dinner after the dinner, and they were all upset. And my friend Janet was having to go around and talk to them, and some people were really upset. There was an evangelist, and I sort of listened to what he said, but I didn't quite get it. Anyway, I came home, and Barry, her husband, gave me the that book by Demo Shakarian, The Happiest Christians on Earth or something, and the book of John. So I came home, and Richard said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I'm going to read these two books." So I read them, and I said, "Well, I don't know about that happiest book." I said, "They seem pretty happy," but I said, "When I went to that dinner, they were crying a lot." I said, "I think they're happy because they're in California." And he said, "Oh, so you're not impressed with that book?" I said, "Well, it's interesting, but I don't think that the people that I met were happy." And I said, "But I've read this other book, the book of John." I said, "I remember this book." And I said, "This is this book." Because when you're a Catholic child, you don't read the Bible. Anyway, she took me to another meeting, and he again preached the gospel. And I remember thinking that it was strange. I said, "Why don't you turn the lights on in this room?" I said, "Because that man has a light right in his eyes." And she said, "Oh, no, Bonnie, the lights are on in this room. I don't know what you're talking about." I said, "Well, that particular man," I said, there's a light, some bright thing there. Can't be easy for him to speak." So he said, "Do you want to come up and be saved?" And I said, "Well," she said, "Do you want to go up?" I said, "No." Little did she know that when her husband had come in the building office, he tried to witness the gospel to Richard. He did creation to revelation. And Richard was like, "What's he talking about?" And so he came out of Richard's office and sat down. I said, "What happened?" He said, "Oh, I don't think he wants to listen." I said, "Well, what did you say to him?" He said, told me, and he said, "You can give your life to God." And, it did the whole thing. And I said, "Oh, how do you do that then?" He said, "Oh, well, you just talk to God and tell him you want to give him your life and that you want to accept Jesus." I said, "Oh, okay." So I went home. I left my desk and went home, went into my conservatory and did it all by myself. And then when I went to the meeting with Janet, she said, "Do you want to go up?" I said, "No." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because I already did that." She said, "What? When did you do that?" And I said, "When your husband came in the office." I said, "He told me what to do, so I did." And we were at that point, our building business was going bankrupt. And he had told me that if you let God in your life, you would deal with all these things, right? So I said, "Well, you're getting the short end of the stick, God, but here you go." And the next morning, someone bought our house with for cash. Yeah. And I thought, oh, well, that was good. That's true what he said. So when she said, "You didn't go up," "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I'd done what Barry said." She said, "You better come home with me," because the speaker was staying in her house. He was called Bob Barker. So, and he looked like John the Baptist. He was a Calvary church. He was just wild kind of man. And so we went to her house and he said, "I understand that you've made a decision." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Are you saved?" I said, "Saved from what?" He said, he said, "Saved." I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I said, "Are you talking about Jesus being my Lord?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Oh, sure. Barry told me how to do that." So they start to cry and they went in the kitchen. So I said to him, "See, not happy. These people are not happy." He said, "I better go home with you and see your husband." I said, "Okay." So we went off home and then came in to meet Richard. Richard was very wary. But the first 6 weeks when I was saved, I stayed up. I didn't sleep much. I just read the Bible all the time and I played praise tapes in the middle of the night. So Richard thought, wow, this isn't good. Anyway, about 6 weeks later, he accepted the Lord himself. So,
Praise God. Well, thank you so
yeah.
much, Bonnie, for sharing your incredible life story and how
Okay.
you're helping
Sorry if it's
people.
so long.
No, it's great. I actually wish it could be longer, but I know you've got stuff to
Okay.
do, so it's
We can do
amazing.
a part two. If people have questions, you could ask them. If you want to ask Bonnie any questions, then I could come back and do some more.
We would love to do that, Bonnie. I'm definitely
Okay.
going to put that out there. If anyone's got any questions for Bonnie, we'll do a
Give
part
my
two.
love to Rachel because Rachel used to call up the escape helpline in the 1990s and she would say to me, "I'm glad, you know, I always get Richard on the phone and he's always talking scripture to me." Well, it wasn't long ago that somehow I contacted Rachel or she contacted me on Facebook, I think, and she told me that story.
Well, that's
So,
amazing. Well,
yeah,
thank you
give her
so
our
much,
love.
Bonnie. I will send my
Yeah.
love to Rachel, who I go to church with, and who just so happens to be in mutual contact with Bonnie. So that's amazing. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Bonnie, for your time, and
Okay.
I hope you
Thank
have a
you,
lovely day.
Lucy. You too. Bye bye.
Bye.